there's magic in the process, and it's gonna
Mm,
get lost if we have robots making everything for us, the same as we have with embroidery machines. Like, I know it's
right.
beautiful, but it's not as special. It's never gonna be as special.
You are listening to Stitch Wish Radio, a podcast for crafting your own magic and threads. I'm your host, textile artist, author, and teacher, Christy Johnson. This week, we are going to be interviewing another artist featured in my new book, The Art of Embroidery Design. This is photographer and embroidery artist Valeria Duque. This conversation was so much fun. We discussed the power of hand embroidery to calm the mind. We talk about accessing inner visions and attempting to illustrate mystical experiences through creating imagery in embroidery. We talk about the logistics of embroidering on a medium as unforgiving as paper. We cover the beauty of language and etymology, and we even touch a little bit on the impact of AI on creative fields. Okay, let's jump into the interview. All right, welcome, Valeria. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm really, really happy to be here, Christy, and so happy to be a part of your future book. And yeah, just excited to talk all things stitching.
Yeah, I learned about your work through the editor of my book and loved it and was like, yes, absolutely, we need to please reach out to her. So for people who are not familiar with your work, can you explain your work and your style to those people?
Yeah, well, I've been a photographer for 16 years, and I've been embroidering for I'm thinking probably 7 years. And I used to do fabric embroidery as more of as a hobby and like a decompressing practice, I guess you could call it. There's a funny story behind that I'll probably tell it later. But I started embroidering on paper on my photographs on the pandemic. I finally had time to do it, and it was just like love at first sight. My work is mostly, well, what I do. I mean, for work, I'm a photographer. I'm a commercial photographer. I do portraits and fashion, and I also have a wedding photography company. And what I do mostly with embroidery is more of a personal thing, and my embroidery work is mostly paper. I would say right now 100% paper, because I fell in love with embroidering paper. Mostly my own pictures, my own photographies that I take. I do occasionally embroider postcards or vintage photos taken by family members or stuff that I find on flea markets. But it's mostly about transcending the limits of photography, which is the fact that when I got into photography, I was very much in love with it because I felt like I needed a creative outlet, and I'm not very good with my hands, ironically. I've never been. Like, I'm not a great painter. I'm not a great tracer. I don't have like the best pulse in the world, like, so I felt like, how can I be creative and not necessarily require using my hands very neatly or like, I'm a perfectionist, so it's very hard for me not to do things perfectly. So I was like very concerned with the outcome. And then I found photography, which is a way to be creative through a machine, which you can learn to control, which is you learn three controls, and pretty much that's the rest is up to you. And then learning about light, which is physics. So I'm a huge nerd. So it was like it all came together for me with photography. I was immediately hooked when I learned how to use a camera, but I was limited. Like, if you compare photography to painting, you do realize there is a limitation. I'm referring to photography as it was conceived, like writing with light. Photo means light, and graphos means writing. So not visual intelligence or those new things that we're saying right now. I'm just talking to photography as it was conceived in the 19th century when it started. So it's limited. It's a limited medium because you cannot photograph something that doesn't exist. In order to get something in a photography, it has to like be there emitting the light that it's going to create the image. So I cannot photograph this cup if the cup doesn't actually exist. So it is limiting in the fact that what you convey in your images has to be necessarily real, has to exist in the real world. When I started embroidering, I realized that it was a way of transcending this limitation, because I could add to my images stuff that wasn't there, that wasn't real, like, or you could convey different stuff that isn't real, like feelings or sensations, stuff that doesn't have like a physical presence in the real world, that cannot emit light, could be conveyed into the image. So that I felt was a very powerful thing about embroidering images. You can do this with collage or painting, or, but as I mentioned before, not great with the hands. so so embroidering for me was just like a logical step. I did it all the time for, as I said before, to decompress. I'm a like a very type A personality person. Like I'm a perfectionist. If you do the Enneagram, I'm like the worst one of the ones in the world. So actually my therapist recommended, like I started embroidering because she was like, I need you to do something that you suck at, like that you know you're gonna be really bad at. And I was like, okay, there's sewing or singing. And it's like, I don't want to make a fool of myself. So I'm gonna get into sewing, embroidering. And I loved it. Like I fell in love with it. I sucked at it so much, but I was so happy doing it. I did a bunch of like really ugly pillows and like embroidered a bunch of patches and stuff. But then when the pandemic hit and I had a bunch of time and I was like, I don't have any more fabric, everything's closed. I have pictures, so I'm going to start embroidering my pictures. And I just played it by ear, like how to punch the paper, how to prepare it, what I damaged a bunch of pictures that I had, which wasn't, it happens with the creative process. It's always like trial and error kind of thing. So my work right now, it's mostly about transcending the photographic limitations with embroidery. And to this day, I'm starting to explore more with cross stitching. Is that how you say it in English? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So cross stitching. I forgot to say I'm Colombian. This explains the accent. The accent. I'm from Colombia, so English is not my native language. So right now I'm very much into cross stitching because it covers a lot of stuff that I wanna look into, which is interconnectivity and image confirmation and how small pixels create an image. When you see them separated, they're nothing, they're abstractions. But then when you like take a step backwards and watch them, and then they can build the whole picture. And that speaks to how we as humans, when we're isolated from one another, are not as powerful as we are when we work. And which I feel is something that we're missing right now in this very highly technological and super connected world. But the humanity of the bonds and of the interactions, it's kind of like getting lost in the way. So it's like a little bit of a reflection on that. And also that it's like also a deep exploration of the digital photographic image that is composed by pixels. So sorry, that was a long answer to a very easy question.
No, it's fine. You brought in so many interesting concepts. I had to take a few notes too, but I'm just going to go to the cross stitch. So how did you decide, because you're already working with embroidery with photography. So how did cross stitch make its way into it?
When I started embroidering, I started doing cross stitch because it's like the easier thing. You know how you always start with the stitch sampler when it's in this little quadrille fabric that has like the little dots on them. I don't know if you guys have, we call it cañamazo in Spanish. So it was, I started to think a lot. I wanted to embroider, to do something with like indigenous communities. I've been visiting indigenous communities around Colombia in the last years, trying to visit the Amazon fairly recently. I've been to a couple of the states in Colombia that are part of the Amazonian jungle. And those were really life-altering journeys. And I wanted to do a little something that points to the importance of these communities and their knowledge and their ancestral knowledge, specifically with nature and plants, which is another one of, I would say my biggest inspiration is definitely nature, which I think it's cliche for embroiderers, but it's a cliche for a reason because it's kind of wow. Because wow, nature. I wanted to do something around that. And I was thinking about how I could do some portraits, which I tried. I did portraits of the elders, of like the knowers. They're called taitas here in Colombia, which are like the medicine men and the medicine women. The abuelas are called in Colombia. And I try to intervene in those with like sacred plants and like drawings. But as I mentioned before, I'm not really good with my hands. So I had to hire someone to illustrate those for me. And those were beautiful embroideries, but I felt like it wasn't entirely what I wanted to, like it didn't convey, it was just a beautiful picture, you know? It wasn't like it didn't make you stop and reflect. So this is how I got to the cross stitch, because I was like I write a lot. So I was writing a lot about like the photographic image and what is happening with AI and how it was transforming, how this was like a paradigm shift, and how we, like photographers who value the true photographic image, could make it different from AI, because you can barely tear them apart right now, and it's gonna get even better every day. The upcoming things that are going to happen with AI, I don't think we can even fathom them right now.
Yeah.
So I was thinking of how to make it in a way artisanal, like return to that thing of photography as it was when it was done with like the daguerreotypes or tintypes, which were one of a kind objects.
Mm.
And that's how it started with the cross stitching. And it was a lot of trial and error as well, because you have to punch the paper and make sure it's straight. And then you have to do, it's always funny when I post my videos with my reels, because now photographers, we have to become content creators. So when I post the reels, people are, where did you get the template? And I'm like, what template? And they're like, oh, you mean the paper that I punched myself, like hole by hole with square template underneath, and that it took me like 11 hours to make. Oh yeah, would you sell it to me? And I'm like, no, kid, no, I'm not gonna sell it to you. So it's like it's all the artisanal thing behind that, and all the time,
Mm.
you embroider, you know how time consuming this is. So I
Yeah.
feel like it's so beautiful to make a photograph, which could be like a total serial object. You can make 1,000 million copies of a digital photograph, but then when you embroider it, it becomes a one of a kind object. Even if I embroider three pictures that are exactly the same pictures with the exact same shades of thread, they're going to be three different objects, because my
Mhm.
mindset is not the same. The way, the tension that I give to the thread is not the same. So I feel like that's very special. This is how it
Mhm.
started with the cross stitch, because it's also a reflection on the composition of the photographic image, and also on this that I was saying of interconnectivity, and how we as humans are alienating from one another and missing out on all these things that basically make us humans. And I don't know if this is the future, like this is a different kind of humanity, but I don't know if I'm interested in being a part of a humanity that is not intrinsically human. I don't
Right.
know if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
So it's
definitely.
more of like, and then I feel like these indigenous cultures have all this knowledge of living in balance and of the importance of community, because they're mostly conceived as communities where the individual is not as important as the community.
Mm.
So this is kind of like pointing to all of that, and that's how I got into cross stitching, which is my current obsession and basically all I want to do all day.
Well, and I love your cross stitching too because if you are listening to this and have not already looked up the Valeria's work, you got to go look at it because the cross stitching is like the color detail. I think it was a bunch of corn, a bunch of maize that was photographed that I saw that you had cross stitched with all the colors, and it was the subtlety of color differences was so nuanced, such beautiful detail. But I feel like it really speaks to that idea that like we of the idea of like a bunch of small pieces working together as one, where it's each shade was slightly different, and that sort of that variety of color is just something that actually helps pull the whole piece together. And so I feel like that just hearing that, having seen it, and just to say your Instagram's all in Spanish and my Spanish is like absolutely horrible. So so I can't.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. That's fine. That's why I was really excited to talk to you actually, because I was like, oh, I can actually learn more about the work having just seen it. And I think that's a whole different, that brings a whole different sort of discussion. Obviously I read the quotes that you provided for the book on your work, and so I knew a little bit about it, but then just being able to enter this interview with like, tell me all about it. I've just seen the so long as how people knew and understood some of their favorite artists. It was just by just seeing the images and maybe a few words here and there. So it's kind of it almost like yeah, having
Which
that.
is also great, because you can have your own interpretation of it. Like, you
Yeah,
see it as no as nuance and color. For me as a photographer, it's mostly light. It's like what
right.
I see when I do this. It's like, this is like bright, this is dark. And then I feel like when you work in photography and we have to edit the amount of work that I've had to edit in the past, like kind of 16 plus years that I've been doing it, your eye becomes very sharp to the nuances of light,
Hmm.
when a shade is a little bit brighter. And this is what I want to like use in my embroidery. So it's like I'm always like having my DMC color chart and being like, I just need a shade lighter. Why don't you make this shade lighter?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I,
oh, and there's like a bazillion shades of
it's
thread,
just
but
not
it's like,
enough. It's
it's
just not
never
enough.
enough. It's never enough. I think
And
we can all
also,
relate to that.
yeah, and I also feel like the way that the color chart is laid out, I know that they have their own philosophy for it. It's
Yes.
nearly impossible to have a two-dimensional,
Yes.
representation of all the colors, but I'm just like, no,
Yes.
the actual color that sits in between those is in this other chart. So,
Yes, I know. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I get it in like my little boxes where I carry my threads too. So
yeah,
it's just like, oh yeah, all the reds are here. I'm good. And then I'm not finding this shade. I'm not, and then I look around and I'm like, oh, that's because the browns are in this box. And it's
right.
like, it's impossible, but it's like, it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, yeah. But always trying to find that one color.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I love the way you describe photography as writing with light. That I had never heard it described that way. So, did you want to talk any more about that?
It's so beautiful though, because it's actually it's the etymology of the word. When you go
Yeah.
back to Latin, that's what it means. I remember when I learned it first, I'm a language nerd all over. Like I'm a huge nerd, but language is one of my favorite things, and languages are one of my favorite things in the world. And etymology is just a thing that I absolutely love. And
Yeah.
then when I learned that photography meant writing with light, for me, the picture that it made in my head was kind of like a laser burning into something. And that was,
Mm.
I use it all the time when I'm doing photography, when I'm teaching photography, which I don't do a lot anymore, but I used
Mm.
to. So when I'm teaching photography, I used to say, imagine a laser burning into something, like when you're like branding something with a laser, that's the way photography works. That's the way light works in the
Mhm.
surface. You can call it film, you can call it a sensor, whatever it is. In digital photography, it's a sensor, in analog
Mm.
photography, it's film, or even in photographic paper, if you're doing like the whole copying process, it's basically light just branding a surface with
Mm.
burning it. So it's very beautiful. If you think about it, it's like a brand. It's something that's been branded into a surface.
Mm.
So I love that, which is one of the reasons why I love analog photography as well, because it involves a chemical reaction as well.
Yeah.
So it's just so beautiful. Also, Latin is so beautiful, and the way it's very poetic. When you get into the origin of words in Latin, it's usually very poetic, and it
Hmm.
has a lot of nuances to it that you can nitpick about and just work your way
Yeah.
around it. Like writing with light. So what is light? So what is writing? What does it entail? What does light entail? What does writing entail? So it's
Yeah.
beautiful. I just love photography. It was love at first sight when I first started. I was kind of like sick of it for a while when I was shooting a lot of weddings, and I
Mm.
just went over the top with it. And then it just turned into a job. And then I
Hmm.
stopped for a while, and then I'm not shooting that many weddings as I used to before. And then I found the joy in it again and the creative part of it. And I started reconnecting with it again. And then through embroidery, as I said before, I was able to transcend it, which I love because I've talked to other photo embroiderers who are friends who are not photographers, and they're always very limited by the images that they find
Right.
because they cannot create the images from scratch. So for me, it's like I find that that's like a huge privilege that I have as a photographer because I can think of an image in terms of what I want to
Mm.
embroider in it afterwards, and I can make it. Like I can build the light from scratch or get the model that I want or look for the scenery that I want. I have so many projects in my head and so little time to accomplish them all, which I think it's a very common thing for everyone who embroiders because it's very time consuming. But yeah,
Yeah, I love that. In high school, I went to an arts high school, and so we had a photo lab, and so I took photography every year I could.
so great.
And so I feel like I think that my year may have been sort of the end of the
I
film, the
know.
developing
Yeah.
of the film in the dark room, or I think maybe it was they did it for a couple more years, but and then I think they kind of phased that out because digital photography. And when I was going there, we were just starting to learn digital photography and editing in
Yeah.
Photoshop and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just like having the image, like having that the image of something being burned in when you're
Yes.
exposing something and you put it in the chemical liquid and you're watching that just
It's
slowly
beautiful.
come to and you're going, oh, I overshot that, or oh, I need to
Yeah.
put less light on it when I'm developing it or whatever, and just having that slow, even though it's still much faster than embroidery, but having that slow reveal
Yes.
the slow reveal
It's
of the
magic.
image.
It's magical. It's
Yeah.
for me. It's magical. Like I tear up when I see a Polaroid developing
Yes.
right now to
Yes.
this day. It's like it's like, for
Yes.
me, it's yeah, it is magical. It is. It's just that we take it for granted because we have the cell phones and it's just immediately available. And for me, like for my when I have a niece and nephew, and I'm always taking pictures of them, obviously. But whenever I'm shooting them with my analog cameras, or like, let me see, and I'm like, no, you can't see it. And then I will like we would do it with Polaroids, or when I get the films now back, and then I'll show them the film, and they're just like so hyped up. They're like, how does it work? Like, I don't understand. It's like, how is the image here, but not on a screen? Why is it on paper? I don't get it. So it's just like, it's so great because it's a total different, it's a paradigm shift, like the one that's happening with AI right now. And it's beautiful to see these kids getting interested about it. And I feel like film is having a renaissance. That's the word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's coming back, which is great. And
Mhm.
I shoot most of my personal work on film, which is really hard to come by here in Colombia. So I usually have to import it. So it's a stretch, but it's like, it's a bet in, like, again, recovering the artisanal part of photography, which I feel it's so magical, as you mentioned before.
Right, right. Well, and you'll love this. This is just a side note, but the photographer who shot Mystical Stitches, Brad Ogbonna, he worked with a lot of film. I don't know if all the images are film, but basically did like half film, half digital. And so
You
like
can tell.
Ashcan. Yeah, oh
You can
cool.
tell.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I could tell. I was like, this guy was shooting this on film.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, his photos are incredible, but it was like seeing the amount of film that he had to go through. And he was like, working with
Yeah.
certain cameras where he did have to order the film. And he's like, this is like gold. Like this, this roll of film
Yes.
is actual gold.
I can relate. I can relate to that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I usually, when I'm shooting film, I always try to do a film and digital just in case,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
in case. But it's usually like I'm developing the digital images, and then the scans come up from the lab, and I'm always like, nope, film is always better. I don't know why, but it's always the case. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So do you feel like your expression shifts between mediums? Like how is your approach to photography different than your approach to embroidery? Assuming, photography is much more instant, but like other than that, how does the approach differ?
I think it is a different approach because in photography you work with what you have. You can
Right.
create the light, you can make a frame and select what you want to include, obviously, what you want to take out, but you're pretty much limited by reality again. Whereas in embroidery, you can choose colors, which is like a big, like, colors speak so many things that are muted. They have like this muted speech. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
red speaks differently than yellow or blue or green, or I don't know, gray. They have different languages of themselves.
Mhm.
So it's like, I feel like choosing a color palette is also a decision that's a big deal, because it conveys different things. You can convey anguish with color, or fear, or sadness, or which is something that you cannot photograph. You can
Right.
photograph an expression of that, but you cannot photograph sadness per se. You can convey it with colors or with texture. So this is the nuances that I feel embroidery brings to the table when it comes to photography, which is like these little things that don't have a physical existence. So for me, I realized this when I started embroidering. It was like, I want to make this picture cuter, like flowers. I want to explore flowers. I want to explore colors. I want to explore. And then this specific embroidery that I did in the pandemic, it was like probably the third picture that I embroidered, was of a model that I shot before. And then I have had experiences with ayahuasca and other medicinal plants. And I find that this experience always have part of it that is very visual and very hard to put into words. I don't know if that's a word in English, ineffable, something that you cannot say with words, which is one of my favorite words in Spanish. It's like, I love something that you cannot put into words because it's all feelings and just intuition and mystical stuff, you can relate to that.
Yeah.
So I had this vision in one of my ayahuasca experiences where like a jaguar lady was talking to me, and I was just seeing plants growing all around her. And it was very profound and transforming because I was feeling very calm by this presence, experience that was, it's very hectic and it's all happening at the same time and it's very intense. And she was just like this very calming presence. And I wanted to kind of like draw her. I tried drawing her. I couldn't do it. I sucked at it. I wound up embroidering her. And it was like, wow, this is so powerful. This is when it clicked, you know, like this is something that you would never see in the physical realm, like a Jaguar lady speaking to you as plants grow around her. But it's something that you can transform a photographic image that's based on something real and transform it into something mystical or surreal, I would say, or super real would be like a good word for that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think the approach is totally different because the scope of the mediums are absolutely different. Like photography is much more limited than embroidery. Embroidery, I feel it's a little bit overwhelming because it's unlimited. So you can basically just embroider whatever you feel like, which is a little bit overwhelming because it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? You know?
Yeah, it feels
So, which
infinite.
is,
Yeah.
it's great, but it's infinite and it's overwhelming, but it's great. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Wow. Just hearing you voice that, it's like I consider myself pretty skilled at drawing, but my drawings never really feel like they fully convey what I need them to. And I do a lot of drawing because I prefer to draw things before I embroider it, but
Yes,
my drawings just
absolutely.
never drawings have never felt that much life. It is when you put it in stitches where all of a sudden it has this just ethereal nature to it and it just feels like it is really from some other place. So I just love that
Yes.
you were able to really put that into words about how that feels. Yeah.
Also it's three-dimensional because it's something you can
Right.
touch, right? So it's
Mhm.
like you cannot touch a drawing. I mean, you can see the texture when you're using like pastels or I
Right.
don't know, oil or different mediums, but I feel like when you embroider something, it just the volume, it's very three-dimensional, which is when you see my work, I always tend to take pictures of my work sideways, like when I always do like the full frontal thing, but then it's sideways so you can see like the texture and the
Mhm.
volume that the thread brings to the image. It's like even bringing something that's mostly visual to a different sense, which is touch, which I
Right.
love. I love touching embroidery. Like I know you shouldn't touch embroidery because it messes with it, but it's so great to be able to touch fabric and just like embroidery and threads. It takes it to a different level.
Right. There's this phrase that I always like to think of. My friend of mine was saying it to his daughter all the time, but everything is ephemeral. And so I say it in her voice when I hear it, like everything is ephemeral.
Oh,
But
it's so cute.
but when I think about, oh, we're not supposed to touch embroidery because it ruins it, it's like everything is going to
Yeah,
like ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Like everything is just going to turn
exactly.
into,
Yes.
um,
Yes, absolutely.
so just I feel like that. But and that makes me think too about another one of my favorite phrases. The embroidery machine has already been invented. Like we don't need to replicate exactly how, we don't need to make our stitches totally perfect.
Yes.
And so I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on how, yeah, embroidery, there's already an AI embroidery, but and people try and create AI embroidery images, but like, can they actually create stitches? So what are your thoughts on that? These handcrafts, like you were saying, analog photography methods. What are your thoughts on that?
As I said before, I think it's all about making, for me, this is a world where we're over consuming resources. We're consuming all the time. It's a system that it's very consuming. Sorry about the repeating myself. But I feel like every practice that has the ability to make an object of consumption a one of a kind object that is not replaceable is a treasure, should be treasured. And I feel like that's what embroidery does, hand embroidery specifically. And what you said before is so true. I say it all the time in my workshops. I'm always telling them like, don't aspire to perfection, because if we wanted perfection, we would get a machine to do it and it would do it perfectly. So it's all about your input, about the humanity of the work. And I feel that's where it's very different. I recently, I think it was last year, I saw a very good use of AI that I loved by this Spanish brand called La Casita de Wendy.
Mhm.
And they did, I don't know if you saw it, did you
No,
see the
I
collection?
just know of the brand. Yeah. I love.
Yeah. So this brand, they did this collection called Artisanal Intelligence. So what they did was the designer designed the knits. It was mostly knits like mostly sweaters and other stuff. No, wait, they also had embroidered stuff like embroidered skirts, embroidered vests and stuff. They did AI images of them on AI models, they posted them online, and they were like, this is how our clothing is going to look. We're going to have it made to order, like wherever buy, you can buy as many certain amount of units of this sweater, the exact sweater. It's not going to look exactly the same because this is AI, but this is our design that we're going to give to our artisans for them to knit and to embroider. And then you can buy it, wait for it, wait for a couple of months when we have it done, and then you'll get it home. And it totally sold out. Like their Instagram just like blew up. Their numbers blew up. They redid it this year. They did another like artisanal intelligence too. So I feel like it's not about saying no to artificial intelligence, to AI, because it's the tool. I feel like it's the tool that we have in our toolbox. It just shouldn't be everything,
right?
Because it has a lot of like issues with it, and also it's not human. It's different. So I feel like it's all about slowing down, and what I said before, treasuring the stuff that makes us unique and that makes objects unique, and thinking about how we consume, what we consume, the uses we give to the objects, and the resources that are limited. And also our energy is limited. So when you put your energy into something, it makes it really special. I love what you said in Mystical Stitches about giving the threads love and intentioning, like putting your intention in the threads. I use it in all my workshops. I always quote you because it's all about that. It's how you're putting your energy into an object that makes it really, really special. You can just go and buy a present for your friend, or you can embroider something for her, and it's going to be like a heirloom or a treasure. When I embroider a picture, it's probably going to be something that they're going to pay more attention to or treasure even more than if I gave them just like a candle. No offense to candles, I love candles, but it's just like or something even something less artisanal. If I give them like, I don't know, a notebook or a phone, an iPhone even, it's like it's something that's serial or made in series. This is a one of a kind thing, so it's pretty special in that way. So I feel we can work with AI. It probably works. It's probably going to be a great tool for, like, I don't know, pattern making, or I mean, we can make it work for us, just not work. How do you say that in English? Instead of us. Thank you. Yeah, instead of us.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because I feel like there's magic in the process, and it's going to get lost if we have robots making everything for us, the same as we have with embroidery machines. Like, I know it's beautiful, but it's not as special. It's never going to be as special as when you have, like, last year I was in Guatemala, and I was seeing this hand embroidery made by these women, and I bought one of these ancient huipiles, which are the dresses that they wear, and it was used, and it was hand embroidered. And then I came back and I was showing it to someone, and it still smelled because she had used it. And I'm like, I'm not going to wash it. It's like a treasure. And I actually want to hang it in my house. And then the person that I was showing it was like, why would you pay for something that stinks and has been used? And I'm like, it's not about the garment, and I'm not going to use it. It's about the work that was put into it, and about the stories. Also, garments have stories to tell. So this is the story of this woman. Like, she worked in it. She would probably work the fields or cooked for her family in it. And she embroidered, and they share this, how this, you talk about it in your books, like this sacred space that you share with the people that you embroider with. So that everything goes into the work. So this is what I feel. It cannot be done by artificial intelligence or by technology it's the human part of it, which is, I feel it's like the most valuable and the most important part of artisanal work. All of it, pottery, embroidery, knitting, you name it, whatever it is. It's the human component. It's the thing that cannot be replicated. It's your soul. Finally, I mean, at the end of it, when you go to the end of it, art, it's your soul talking. So it's that.
Yeah, well, I think it's so hard to find too garments nowadays that both have the lived experience in it and also the art on it. That combination where you can really tell.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're all just
you find couture, but it's crazy expensive, and this is why I love these exhibitions when they have exhibitions of couture whenever I go to New York, and it's like there's the Custom Institute exhibition or an exhibition at FIT, and you get to see firsthand. It's so different to see it, to see
Right.
the actual three-dimensional object that this artisans built, and the
Hmm.
work, the sheer amount of hours that went into it, and you're like, this is not expensive at all, it's just
Right,
like,
right,
it's
totally.
so worth it. It's so worth it. Like, I wish I could afford it. I can't. I don't know if I would even wear it. I would just hang it
Yeah,
on my house in a
yeah.
box, just like, it's so pretty, just like looking at it, which is
Yeah.
why I bought this piece of the huipil in Guatemala, because I was just like
Hmm.
blown away by the sheer amount of work and time that was put into it. It was so
Yeah.
beautiful, and it's their day-to-day outfits, so it's just like the much more valuable because of that.
Right, totally. I was remembering the Dior exhibit that they had at Brooklyn Museum, I think. That is
Mm-hmm.
Maria Grazia Chiuri is the current creative director at Dior, and seeing there were gowns that were hand drawn on, and then you can
Oh my
tell the
god,
stitch,
yeah.
with marker, and then stitches that were done on top of it, and just these incredible elaborate details.
Yes.
And it was, yeah, it was that exact feeling of like, oh, this is not expensive at all.
But
Like
I would
these,
charge more for this.
yeah, yeah. And it brings the question, like, how do we value people's time, and
Yeah,
how has that started to become distorted, the value of people's time and what we think that things should cost based on, essentially taking advantage of people
absolutely.
all over the world. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Like, I see it all the time here. There's a show that they do here in my city, which I love, called Artesano, where artisans from all over the country come to Medellin to sell their stuff in like this massive venue. Like, my favorite place in the world to go. Like, I save up all my money to go there because I know it's all gonna go away. Um, I'm gonna invest it in
Yes.
pieces that I love. But I all the time it happens that I see people bargaining with these artisans, and I'm like, that's so disrespectful. Like, that's so disrespectful. Don't do that. And sometimes I actually tell them, like, would you bargain with your dermatologist? No, you
Right.
wouldn't.
Or your
It's like,
mechanic or your lawyer. And you
why is his or her time, the artisan's time, less valuable?
hmm
Just because, I mean, this is a knowledge that has taken generations to get here. It's
hmm
taken time. It's taking they're traveling here, bringing all this stuff. Just and it's not even pieces that are that expensive. It's just like we
Right.
have this thing of like wanting good things cheap. This is what
Right.
capitalism does. So yeah, I feel like anything that rescues the value of the handmade, it's
Hmm.
worth treasuring. It's worth looking into. It's worth, and it's also become like it's funny because whenever I travel with friends, or with my family, I'm always looking for experiences to look into this. For Guatemala, I was like, I want to do like weave when they're weaving with the
The
thing around
backstrap
their
loom?
waist, the backstrap loom.
Backstrap
Thank
loom,
you.
yeah.
That's that we call it taller, telar de cintura in Spanish. So I was like, I want to do a workshop in this, and I was looking into it. And my friend who I was traveling with, she was like, we might not manage to do it. And I'm like, no, that's not an option. I want to
Yeah.
learn how to do it. I want to see how they do it. I don't understand how it works. We wound up doing it, and it was beautiful. And I'm always trying to find this experience of the artisan, of the handmade, of
Hmm.
like the local knowledge,
Hmm.
and it's become like a thread in all my travels. And I love it. And I love that it's become this thing where I'm not visiting monuments or ruins, and instead I'm visiting people.
Yeah.
And it's just such a great thing. Such a great thing.
Yeah, well, and to see those, I mean, you're seeing the same things as if you were going to see in a monument or ruins, but it's alive, it's living. Like you are seeing
Yes.
these ancient life
Yes.
form or ancient
Knowledge. Yeah,
knowledge, yeah, technology, knowledge, and you're seeing it in modern day and in real life, just really coming to life. That's beautiful. So,
absolutely.
yeah. So where do you find inspiration? I know you mentioned going on these different vacations and visiting and also just visiting locally more indigenous cultures. How do you find the inspiration for the imagery that you work with?
I would say nature would be my
Right.
number one thing. I always say there are two things that are sacred for me in life. I'm not a religious person. I'm very spiritual, but I'm not religious at all. I was raised Catholic, but I don't identify as Catholic. And I would say nature is by far my biggest inspiration. And then all the experience that include like the mystical part of what you have, like your inner world.
Hmm.
I've been practicing yoga for 15 years. As I mentioned before, I've had experiences with sacred plants
Hmm.
and meditation. And for me, nature is also one of those transcendental experiences. You know how
Yeah.
when you're gazing at a landscape that's very overwhelming, or listening to sounds, or for me, for example, rivers are a big part. For me, rivers are, I don't know why. I don't know why to explain it. Like the ocean, yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, okay, it's there. But for me, rivers, they're really, really special. Fortunately, I live in a country that's filled with them. So I try to visit rivers pretty frequently,
Mm.
photographing them, swimming in them, just like it's like my therapy. So I would say nature is by far my biggest inspiration, which encompasses a lot of stuff. Like light is also a part of nature. Obviously, I'm a photographer, so for me, light is very, very inspiring. And then when you put it together with what happens inside of you when you're in this like states, meditative states, those experiences that overwhelm you, that make you stop and look and just like stop in this like crazy, crazy rhythm of a world we live in. And this experience, everything that makes you stop on your tracks and just look, that's where I find the inspiration. I started cross stitching in pictures with this series called Nativa, which is about native plants of the Americas, mostly native plants used by indigenous American communities. So this is why corn, this is why pumpkins, this is why cacao, which is cocoa, I think in English, beans. Right now I'm embroidering how do you say that in English? Fique, which is what they make the artisanal burlap out of. They make this like
Mm.
threads, like this golden threads out of it. And it's like a species of
Oh, wow.
cactus that they make threads out of. We use them a lot here to make burlap. So right now I'm writing one of those. And it's all about that, like these native plants. So the inspiration definitely comes from nature and everything nature related, I would say.
Yeah, I just looked up real quick what burlap is made of. Flax, hemp.
I think it's flax because hemp is cáñamo, which is different. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this plant.
Oh, wow. No, it must be just a regional different because that looks like almost like
Yeah,
agave to me, or not even your yucca,
looks
maybe,
like
but
an agave. Yeah, it's
yeah.
definitely, yeah, it's a cousin of the agave, definitely the same
Okay.
family. And they shave it and they dry it
Mm.
and they make threads out of it and then they weave it and it's really, really beautiful. And they use it for everything, for like sacks and for like ropes and a bunch of stuff. I'm actually thinking of framing this embroidery with a little bit of the actual material underneath, just like in the frame, which I've been
Oh, I love that.
experiencing with. So yeah, so it's all about these native plants that have given us so much, because it's
Mhm.
this thing with nature, and she's just been so generous, and we're just taking and taking and taking. And she's just like, yeah, it's limited, but there's always more. And I live in the country right now, and I've experienced this every day in my garden. I have like a vegetable garden that I grow, which is like the love of my life right now. Like a first mother who's showing pictures of her kids to everyone. No, I'm showing pictures of my lettuces. Like, check
Yes.
this spinach out. It's like, what do you think of this rubella, huh? It's like it's like that's like my pride and joy right now, and it just like experiencing firsthand how nature gives and gives. It's so overwhelming and so beautiful. And I try to have that featured in my work, like all this generosity and abundance that we're missing out on.
Obviously, we have such a like-minded sense when it comes
I
to
know, this
inspiration
is
and our
why I
process and
loved your
everything.
book. This
Yeah,
is why I
that's
loved your book. I was like stuck. My nose was into it for like the whole morning, and I couldn't let it go until I read it all. It was such a great, and
oh.
I felt so honored to be a part of the second book because of that.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you in there. Oh, this has been so wonderful. So, can you tell people where they can find out more about your work or find your work in different places? Oh, also, you teach workshops, right?
I
So, can
do,
you
I
tell us about the
do.
workshops that you teach before we jump into the main?
Yes, I've been doing them since the pandemic. I've been doing some online. Then people here in Medellin have been asking. I live in Medellin, in Colombia. They have been asking for something face to face, so I've done a couple of those. I love teaching. I feel like it's one of my callings. Everything. I love teaching photography, embroidery, whatever I can teach. I even did like a composting tutorial in the pandemic because why not? And
Yeah.
I've been composting for a while now. So I do workshops. I haven't done one in English. I don't know if I would have the audience for it. So if anyone's interested, please let me know. I do photo embroidery for beginners. You don't have to know how to embroider or anything at all. And yeah, so it's like a 3 hour long meeting where we get together, we embroider, we talk about all of this that we just spoke, and we get deep into it, into what embroidering on paper entails, how to prepare
Mhm.
everything, the pictures, the punching, the materials, because it's different from fabric. It
Yeah.
has its whole different process because you have to think before you punch and you cannot unpunch. So yeah, so it has a different approach to it, but it's one that I love. And yeah, that's how it works. And then for my work, you can find me mostly on Instagram. It's what I keep mostly updates. I do mix it with my photography work, so it's embroidery and photography
Yeah.
and a little bit of everything. My cats are in there as well,
Yeah.
which I promise they're very cute. um so you can find me on Instagram as V Duque P. It's like VDUQUEP. And yeah, I think that's it. That's mostly where you can find me. And then there's the link to my website, which I try to
Cool.
keep updated. And that's pretty much it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for having me. And I love talking to you, Christine.
Yeah, totally.